Paradigm tension. Rational science has led the modern world into new frontiers. But has this external evolution of technology been kept up with by an internal evolution of consciousness? Depth psychology may argue that the conscious attitude of modern man, while oppositional to the consciousness which came before, is just as underdeveloped and one-sided. Through Jungian art-space research, I hope to dive into the possibility of a conjunction between the consciousness that came prior to, as well as post-modernization, and the sort of healing and progression this coexistence could foster. The unconscious is that which the conscious mind does not see. In fact, it is compensatory to the conscious mind, holding the contents which the conscious mind represses. Additionally, the unconscious psyche being life itself, is the unseen ordering factor of life, the soul of matter, and that which animates all that we are not conscious of. It is the force which creates synchronicities, produces dreams, and is where the archetypes live. Synchronicities are meaningful coincidences where conscious awareness fuses with unconscious manifestation. Dreams are the products of the unconscious as the conscious mind sleeps, and archetypes are that which pattern life unconsciously. The collective unconscious is the connective force underneath the unconscious psyche, which connects and holds the history of humanity, the history of life. It carries instincts as images across nations and across time. The instincts push upon the archetypes, creating archetypal images. You see, one cannot integrate an understanding of the entirety of an archetype, as it holds too much information for the conscious mind to process. Therefore, we get archetypal images. These are single pictures of the archetype, and a picture is worth 1,000 words. For example, Loki is a picture of the trickster archetype, but so is Hermes, and so is your brother when he plays a trick on you. The archetypes are endless. The unconscious has a lot to teach consciousness, as it is older and larger than the conscious mind. It is led by the caps lock S self, the archetype of wholeness, which leads one down the path of individuation or self-actualization. There I was paraphrasing the beautiful woman Susan Rowland in her book Jungian the Humanities. In Man in Search of a Soul, C.G. Jung defines archaic as meaning, quote, primal, original, end quote. He describes the consciousness of someone before modernity, rationalism, and enlightenment values. He postulates that while it might be tempting to look at the developments of modern society and think of modern people as removed or essentially different from the archaic, modern people at root are, quote, caught in the same presuppositions and blinded by the same prejudices, end quote, there's my cat, as those who came before. It is an unsettling image. The possibility that while the external reality evolves, consciousness does not. The external world has grown, perhaps even at the cost of the development of the internal world, as current mental health statistics demonstrate. Jung speculates that psychologically, before and during modernity, people are and have been blind in their relationship to reality due to their own neglect to examine the assumptions that underlie their knowledge of reality. He sees modern people as assuming causality, that there is always an A to B link which can be rationally understood. Therefore, modern people have lost faith in that which cannot be explained through microscopes or by those in lab coats. However, he claims those living without and before modernization assume that events are caused by a third party or some unknowable essences which enables B to happen, perhaps a spirit, a god, or a magician. These are two opposite assumptions, equally one-sided. Assumptions create models of what reality is believed to be by the collective. These are called paradigms. Professor Susan Rowland identifies an aspect of the gargantuanly influential power of the paradigm. It's regulation of knowledge. The paradigm controls the parameters around which knowledge is found and determines what counts as knowledge. The scientific method functions as the modern paradigm in which knowledge is found, apparently without being affected by an observer, and is only valid as such. Yet we know this is troubled by quantum physics, which has demonstrated that the observer affects the observed. Still, this paradigm holds that in reality, parts can be separated from a whole, measured, studied, and known objectively. The arm can be studied and known without factoring in the body, the roots of the tree without looking at the environment, and the sky as separate from the earth. This is an especially problematic paradigm in a field like psychology, where 1 + 1 does not always equal 2 and is demonstrated by the current replication crisis in the field of psychological research. In mainstream psychology, case studies are not held with the same esteem as large-scale statistical maps of the population, produced by the scientific method and creating the kind of knowledge valued by the paradigm and thus the population. It is not that this knowledge is not valuable, but it is only one kind of knowledge. The objective study is good, but we have to remember the other side of these things. The one-sided perspective cannot hold all of the answers. With such a focus on rational understanding, the side of reality we cannot predict is devalued. The individual, the exception, the subjective experience, and the caps lock other, those parts that are products of the unconscious psyche, are ignored. Jung stated that to value the unconscious psyche as something which produces knowledge, quote, is by no means such a delusion as our Western rationalism likes to suppose, end quote. He uses the example of the study of animal instincts, specifically with insects who demonstrate that, despite having no conscious knowledge, act in certain ways which illustrate a high degree of knowledge. For example, scout bees use dance to indicate the viability of a new home. Their dance's angle to the sun indicates the quality of the possible new location. Jung describes, quote, common sense cannot doubt that their unconscious action patterns are psychic functions. Man's unconscious contains all patterns of life and behavior inherited from his ancestors. Every human child prior to consciousness is possessed of a potential system of adapted psychic functioning, end quote. Yet this kind of knowledge emerging from the unconscious psyche cannot be scientifically measured. It is outside of the scientific paradigm. Therefore, its implications are not taken seriously by the modern person. To understand this kind of knowledge would be to collect knowledge via the unconscious, via the archetypal and instinctual, whereas the scientific model only incorporates conscious knowledge. Conscious knowledge is knowledge which can be measured and predicted with accuracy. It has the quality of the sun's clear light. It is extremely useful in external development, such as in building planes. Yet, there is also unconscious knowledge, which is used to develop internally. This wisdom can only be inferred, as it can never be seen with complete certainty. In the daylight, we know what happened, but under the moonlight, we dream, and we can never be sure of its real meaning. It might mean two opposite things at once, or two just different things at once. However, the moonlight has a lot to offer the conscious attitude, and it is there to compensate for the surety of consciousness. A complex. A complex is a psychic split characterized by one-sidedness, where one is conscious of half the story while denying the other half, and in the split, part of the psyche has been cut off from conscious awareness. Roland describes a cultural complex as a complex which is collective. An entire population will believe in one paradigm with such religiosity that they deny the caps lock other incomplete. In the modern objective worldview, by not validating the role of subjectivity, Modernity has created a subject-object split. We are no longer aware of our projections onto the objects, and therefore the true nature of our relationship with it. Our soul projections and our subjective viewpoint has become unconscious. When the modern person denies the half of reality which embraces the internal soul of matter, the world becomes dispirited. Jung describes the way a modern man thinks. Quote, he must strip the world in order to dominate it. To see his world objectively, he must take back all of his archaic projections, end quote. Archaic projections are like psychic projections. They color the entire reality. This is why the observer cannot be separated from the observed, as everything we know about reality is experienced by the individual subjectively and projected onto. The individual observes reality through inner images and impulses whose essence cannot be studied in a lab. Thus, the individual perspective is disregarded. Yet psychic projections always color every interpretation of the objective facts. This is where Jungian arts-based research comes in. Challenging the current paradigm, this research is based on the paradigm of the autonomous image. Quote, art as a materialization of psychic archetypal images is a physical weaving of a common archetypal inheritance that Jung called the collective unconscious, filtered through art/cultural traditions and the individual's artistic conscious strategies. Roland and Weishaupt. I'm sorry if I pronounced that wrong. Images of art arise from the unconscious. Therefore, they have a life of their own. These autonomous images provided by the psyche can be seen in artistic movements, which display the collective impulse. They are the movement of the culture, like the scout bees pointing to their next home, and are guided by an other force. Caps lock O, other. In summary, art includes the subjective, the unconscious, the psyche, and the caps lock other, which produce autonomous images connected to humanity as a whole. Through the artistic impulse, the unconscious psyche guides the artist's hand. He or she becomes a tool through which the psyche speaks and through which we can gain knowledge. To give an example of this in action, we will look at a poem which emerged from my own artistic urge. Kali, dark feminine. Teeth in your flames, sharp, penetrating, dark. Inside the canal, you, the portal, the deep feminine, the sex, the death. Messy hair everywhere, dirt burnt, black, vision lost, we can't see. Yet your eyes open so wide, face illuminated by the glow. From a red halo mandala, your enlightenment drips with blood. The demon slayer, mistaken for the demon, get low, below you. You strike the most sensitive part. You wield the blade. It's your art. You are the deepest, blackest water. You castrate the father. The dark feminine causes much apprehension. Come to me. You call me. You're magnetic. Your pain is heavier the closer I come, so dense you couldn't hear a hum. This is rage. Defender of the earth, defender of birth, snakes carry your pain, the animal companions to your husband, who reigns. Shiva, asleep below, is he your foe? Queen of the yogis? They don't see the delicate flower you're hiding, their self-fulfilling prophecy. They created you, they need you. Tongue outstretched, the strongest muscle in the body. Lick, 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 can't be stopped. Blood drains, pop, pop, pop. She licks you like her lollipop. Her power strengthens when you hide. Little cuts, ignored, throat lumps, poisoned, slit, sever severely. The passageway, the bridge is burned. The body and the mind are no longer combined. The jugular is the quickest way to die. You are a god, Isn't it odd? The rejection, the lack of reflection, projection with no circumspection. Can you define perfection? The tongue and the sword covered in blood, so much red, a color of cooking, self-development, and sacrificial transformation. Kali was the first goddess I ever connected with. I was 21, addicted and narcissistic. I had many omens around a yoga teacher training, which I followed. This training focused on yogic philosophy, namely Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, and reverence for the Hindu gods. Upon witnessing the image of the goddess Kali, I did not consciously know it at the time, but an unconscious part of me had awakened. It was as if a strong transpersonal force arose, exactly the one I desperately needed. Quote, decent women may cover their bodies, bind their hair, deny their sexuality, and live lives of self-denial and self-discipline. But Kali dances naked, with her hair unbound, unaffected by the disapproving stares of those around. By behaving thus, Kali forces the individual to look at all the things one fears, represses, denies, and suppresses. Things that exist outside man-made moral and ethical codes. Things that fill life with uncertainty and restlessness. End quote. Mohanty. In the years leading up to this, I had been destructive and suicidal. Upon my awakening to Kali's image, some part of me began to realize my destructive urges were all too literal and needed to be recalibrated. I needed a metaphorical death. It was a time to reimagine who I was and how I should live my life. I needed Kali's knife to differentiate what needed to be destroyed from what should remain. Through daily meditation and stillness with this image, I realized I was not satisfied with my successful career. It would be very hard to leave it, as it was how many defined me and what many valued me for, including even my own family. But Kali provided strength. Furthermore, I realized that I was living in ways which were demonstrated to me by my own addicted parents, and I needed new values, which I found in the yamas and niyamas, the moral restraints of yoga. This was a time of my life where I needed to cut away the false definitions of myself and break patterns of action that were not serving my self-development. I needed to cook in the red. Kali called for my blood sacrifice. Her tongue would clean away the previous version of who I thought I was. This poem comes almost exactly 6 years later, and my relationship to this goddess is now being tested. As nothing is one-sided, the archetypal field of Kali has its dangers. Too much cutting and too much independence while trying to create and sustain a relationship can be an issue. I recently became scared of myself, of Kali within me. I knew Kali had new lessons for me, and I wondered if my own definitions of Kali had become stale. I needed new knowledge. Therefore, I dove more deeply into her with my poem, each line painting a new image, fostering a new discovery. The words reflect a dark caps lock O other, the aspect of reality which we hide from, coming to light. This is the reality that is messy and burnt. Until this writing, I never realized how burnt her hair was. Now it's all I can see. What value do my archaic psychic projections hold? Many spiritual and cultural traditions speak of hair as holding memory. As my poem states, Kali is a goddess in deep pain, and perhaps her hair as an image is a metaphor for traumatic karmic traces. Ancestral trauma is a theme emerging in art around the nation, in the collective. Pulitzer Prize and Grammy Award-winning musician Kendrick Lamar's new album, Mr. Morale and the Big Steppers, tells his story of going to therapy to heal the wounds he had received and was inflicting on those around him. The album ends with a recording of his wife, Whitney, saying, "You did it. I'm proud of you. You broke a generational curse. Say thank you, Dad." And then his children are like, "Thank you, Dad." In a similar vein, the Academy Award-winning film Everything Everywhere All at Once follows a mother who has pushed her daughter too far and created a black suicidal void within the daughter. The film ends with the generations of the family pulling the daughter out of the void as the entire family learns to change their ways. In both of these stories, it is noticeable that it is the woman who fosters the change. Lamar says in the song Mother I Sober, "So I set free the power of Whitney, may she heal us all." At the same time, as this art is being released, I am stuck on the image of Kali's burnt hair. This synchronicity suggests a collective impulse to heal the memories of the past, an impulse to look directly at the burnt hair. Jung knew that due to the feminine's relationship with the earth, the body, the subjective, the irrational, the dark, the soul, feeling, connection, chaos, and the unconscious, it had been rejected in an age of rationality and enlightenment. This is the image which Kali portrays, and it is why she is rejected. In Jungian terms, irrational does not mean illegitimate. It pertains to being guided by a perception of an inner image as opposed to a judgment based on any already established external principle. Kali asks you to keep perceiving the image, to go farther and deeper than a heuristic would allow. Relate to it while holding the tension of not knowing. She stops you from relying on past understanding. She asks you to sacrifice what you thought you knew in order to see the dark shadows of your misunderstandings and find freedom within. She is dark, and in darkness we are blind. Yet the figure contrasts this. Her eyes are wide open. She sees the figures in the dark and helps us do the same. The current paradigm is of a yang-like patriarchal frame, which wants to know for certain and does not care for uncertain shadows. Kali's blackness knows about the yin half of reality, where we can never have certainty. She represents the unknown and the unconscious elements of matter, those forces which, if made contact with, will change and transform the conscious attitude. Yet the masculine resists change and is the reason why Kali's wisdom is rejected by the masculine eye. Contrastingly, the feminine creates life, and thus the feminine body knows about transforming life. Holding the tension of the opposite is characteristic of the healing found in Jungian psychology, as Jungians hope to take people out of the current paradigm and merge the modern person with the wisdom of the past, the archaic wisdom. This would mean valuing both the conscious and the unconscious, modern and archaic. Roland describes the modern paradigm as based on dualism, where rationality triumphs. She sees this historically in myth, where the Sky Father dominates the Earth Mother. She claims that Jungian psychology, by leading with Mother Gaia's black unconscious wisdom, tries to heal the split of Western thought and attempts to reintroduce the validity of the irrational side of nature to the, quote, Sky Father's rational science, end quote. Roland emphasizes the importance of Jung putting his theory to practice. She describes Jung's writing as, quote, trickster-esque, as he contracts himself over and over. Contradicts, not contracts. That is a Freudian slip, if I've ever heard one. As he contradicts himself over and over again. She points to this component of his writing as, quote, voices of the caps lock, O other. Rowland describes the unconscious as a face which, like the trickster, shreds our categorizations. She states that, in her eyes, the most important aspect of Jung's writing is that the existence of the unconscious undermines all secure knowledge. He prioritizes the gravity of the unconscious above everything else, including his own ideas, structures, and concepts, end quote. This is especially unattractive to the Western mind, where we have confused the scientific method with singular ultimate truth. Kali and Jungian psychology will never deliver truth. They will only show one's blindness, the unconscious side. This is a different kind of enlightenment, the one found in the mandala which drips in blood. It clarifies what needs to be sacrificed, what needs to die. This loss may feel demonic, but the poem assures us that the demon is in the blood that Kali wipes away, not Kali herself or her blade. Historian Richard Tarnas describes in The Passion of the Western Mind the historical development of Western thought as evolving the external while denying the internal, therefore devaluing the feminine principles. Quote, "This development has been found on the repression of the feminine, on the repression of mystery, ambiguity, of imagination, emotion, instinct, body, nature, and woman." End quote. Perhaps this is why the poem urges us to lower ourselves. Instead of being high in the air with our ideas and ideals, we must lower ourselves to the dirt of the earth from which the body and the instincts arise. When the poem talks of killing the father symbolically represents old definitions and ways of being, and this is necessary for new life to be born. The contraction before the birth. This is the dance of creation, the pain of creation. And we cannot forget that when we kill those masculine principles, something new must be born in their place. When I did my yoga teacher training all that time ago, what was born as the new ruling principles was the yama niyamas. These moral and ethical restraints. These were the new order that had to emerge. There's always a new birth, a new order which must emerge. It can't just be a chaos vacuum. Death implies birth, and birth implies death. Everything is impermanent. So, if you want something to die, ask yourself, what do I want to give birth to? This might help. Even my definition of Kali herself had to be killed and reborn through this act of Jungian arts-based research. The outdated principles are imaged by the men's heads around Kali's waist. Oedipus kills the father, Kronos kills his father, and Zeus kills his father. But these are all sons. Importantly, in my poetic myth, it is not the sun hero doing the killing, but the feminine. The feminine is the one holding the new ruling principles. She asks the old principles to meet the caps lock O, other. She kills with a force that, after being repressed and shamed for so long, is enclosed in pain, creating rage. This is also seen in Everything Everywhere All at Once. This is also seen in Kendrick Lamar's new album. This pain, this feminine, this rebirthing. And in these new myths, it is the feminine emerging, and the feminine is covered with pain. These are the new stories of the new millennium. Kali is the black feminine, the two factors most rejected in our age and most opposed to the modern paradigm. This is a truly alternative story emerging everywhere. The daughter killing the father as Kali stands over Shiva. It is the empowerment of the feminine. This is the story of Lilith, who is opposed to the Western Christian mythos. In the Jewish myth, Lilith came before Eve. She was Adam's first wife. She refused to be subservient to him, and so she was banished. and her story was taken out of the Bible, and now we see it reemerging in the collective psyche. Do we see this story within the Western paradigm? Perhaps the knowledge created in all of this art is the current reimagining of the feminine rising, the feminine principles not as subservient, but as equally capable of taking the throne. Kali's tongue is one of her most prominent features, and the tongue is the strongest muscle in the body. Quote, "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God." John 1:1. Kali herself is a goddess, and her duty is to help us articulate that which we fear. Because this is so uncomfortable, her force is ignored. But to reject her is even more dangerous, as she will eventually emerge through a back door, the unconscious action. In the modern paradigm, she is rejected, and we project onto her without seeing our own shadow in the reflection, just as we do with the feminine and unconscious knowledge and blackness, darkness. My poem ends questioning perfection. Kali and the unconscious shows us that perfection is impossible, that we only have continual beginnings and endings, movement and circulation. The more we know we don't know. Kali inspires doubt in our assumptions, in our inherited ways of being. She is calling to us to lessen her pain by embracing her, to evolve with her as human beings have never done. When she licks up our assumptions, she helps humanity to hold multiple paradigms at once. She guides us toward her blood-soaked enlightenment of black. Jung tells of transformation taking place when resonant themes emerge in dream and fantasy life. The source of the fantasy is veiled, and the patient is struck with what he or she may call a revelation, claiming that in the depths of the psyche, there is something that is not themselves that has been met and challenges the individual. Jung sees this process as a confrontation with and gaining access to, quote, the sources of psychic life, and this marks the beginning of the cure, end quote. In writing my poem, this is exactly what I experienced. I was scared of Kali's darkness. I was scared of her pain because I was scared of my own pain. I was scared of my own ignorance, my own false assumptions. I, stuck in the Western patriarchal rational paradigm, began to fear her. Therefore, I rejected her. Yet, through making this art, I had the confrontation Jung speaks of, and I made her conscious for myself and those who would read it and take it seriously as a source of knowledge. Jung claims that, quote, the culmination of the illness, the destructive powers were converted into healing forces. The archetypes come to independent life and serve as spiritual guides for the personality, this supplanting the inadequate ego. Psyche has awakened to spontaneous life, end quote. The moment I took this photo of Kali, the flame leapt. Tea candle flames never rise so high. With this synchronicity, I imagined Kali, a goddess ignored and pushed down by society, in the flame, wanting to be seen, pictured, revered, and made conscious. To hear her, we must find stillness. We must revere the silence itself and take seriously what comes forward. Quote, in that quiet, feel our way into the thick atmosphere of the anima mundi, the ensouled world, where the tendrils of everything of matter interweave into a great glistening web. Awareness of the living matrix of matter, End quote. Elizabeth Nelson. This is what the modern paradigm has forgotten. And it is time to remember this part of ourselves and our connective, collective, elusive consciousness.